Welcome to BCIS 1305. Today's topic is Chapter 2, the Internet. My name is Dr. Schuessler, and I'll kind of walk you through some of these slides here, and we'll talk about each one of the topics. So Chapter 2, the Internet, from our Shelley Cashman text. So the objectives for this chapter are to discuss the evolution of the Internet. So we talked about in the last class a little bit about the evolution of the Internet. In this lecture, we'll delve into that just a little bit more. We'll talk about some of the different types of broadband internet connections. Not every connection is created equally. We'll describe the purpose of an IP address and how that relates to a domain name. We'll describe some of the features of browsers and identify some of the components of a web address. We'll talk about the ways to effectively search using a search engine. We're going to talk about some of the benefits and risks of using social networking sites. We'll also talk about some of the uses of various types of websites and identify and briefly describe the steps required for web publishing. We'll explain how websites use graphics and animation, things of that nature, to kind of spice up the sites and attract and retain users. We'll explain how email lists and instant messaging, etc. all work. And we'll talk about the rules for netiquette. Okay, so in the first class, we talked about an internet versus the internet, little I versus capital I. An internet is simply a collection of networks. Two or more networks tied together become an internet. The internet is what really allows us to go out and connect to all the commercially available sites that or publicly available sites, I should say, sites that we're interested in seeing, things like the various governmental sites, businesses, educational institutions, and things like that. An internet, lowercase I, uses the same technologies. It uses web servers, it uses web browsers, but it doesn't have that general access out to the rest of the internet like capital I internet does. So where did the internet come from? Contrary to popular opinion, it was not Al Gore. In fact, you could trace back some of the origins quite a bit further to the 50s, with the launch of Sputnik during the Eisenhower administration. Eisenhower really valued his use of scientists quite a bit, and in response to the launch of Sputnik, he helped to develop a program known as ARPA, the Advanced Research Projects Agency. And over the years, it sponsored various advanced research projects, one of which ended up becoming what's known as the ARPANET, or the forerunner of the internet, if you will. And the idea behind it was to allow scientists and allow academicians at different institutions to be able to collaborate and work together, to be able to work on different problems and things of that nature. Part of the idea behind it was that as this network grew, that it should continue to function even if part of the network becomes disabled for whatever reason, whether it be due to a military strike from the Soviet Union or failure on the part of switches. The real reason for this is kind of a debatable point. Some people say it was because of military issues, others say it was because of problematic equipment. But certainly it's an advantage to be able to continue to function when part of the network goes down. So in 1969, the first 4 nodes become functional. These 4 nodes are out on the West Coast. 3 of them are in California and 1 is in Utah. And this allows these computers to connect to each other to be able to share resources, share files, share programs, things of that nature. By 1984, there's 1,000 individual computers or hosts linked together on the ARPANET. Today there's millions, at least according to the text there's millions. I suspect that number is quite a bit larger. At least tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions or more hosts connected to the internet. When you start to think about the fact that we connect everything to the internet, we connect our laptops and our desktops, our phones, our coffee pots, our cars, our vacuum cleaners, everything gets connected to the internet, it seems like anymore. And those are all unique hosts requiring unique IP addresses. So I suspect that number is quite a bit larger than it discusses in the text. So how do we physically connect or virtually connect to the internet? Well, we can connect either via wired connections through some sort of a communications device, or through wireless connections, again through some sort of a communications device. Now the text talks about not having, if you don't have a communications device, that you can use some sort of external device, and this is sort of true. Every device that wants to connect to the internet has to have some sort of communications device, whether it's built into the system that we're using or it's an add-on to the system that we're using. It has to have some sort of a communications device, whether it's a USB attachment, an expansion card, or what have you. Okay, so those two different types in general can be classified as two different types of connections to the internet. Can be classified in general as wired or guided media, or radiated media or wireless connectivity to the internet. When we talk about wired, we're typically, some of the common ways to do this are through our cable service, through our telephone service with DSL lines, or through fiber to the premises, or sometimes referred to as fiber to the home. Each of these has their own advantages. Fiber obviously is very fast. It tends to be more secure. DSL is relatively inexpensive and provides pretty good service, though the range isn't quite as good the further away that you get from the telephone office. Cable tends to be faster, but again, you're limited by their service area, and there is a little bit of a security issue in that you're sharing bandwidth with your neighbors. This means that they can look in and see the data that you're downloading and uploading. As long as it's encrypted, it becomes less of an issue. But at the same time, the more of your neighbors that happen to be on at the same time you are, the more of that bandwidth you're having to share with them, so your performance will go down. When we talk about wireless connectivity, most of us are familiar with Wi-Fi. That's what we connect to in most of our homes and offices. We go to Starbucks or McDonald's. That's what we're talking about. We also have mobile broadband. That's typically what we use to access the internet from our phones. That's our 3G service, 4G, 5G, etc. We've also got fixed wireless. Mobile broadband tends to use omnidirectional antennas, and this is what allows us to move around very easily and remain connected. But one of the disadvantages to this is that our range is more limited. Fixed wireless allows us to concentrate the energy in our transmitting devices and extend that range significantly. So if we have a building that happens to be in a remote location, in a lot of cases we can connect that building back to the internet using fixed wireless antennae. We also have the option of satellite internet service. This is good for very remote locations. It can be a bit pricey, though those prices have come down over the last few years. The performance is also impacted a little bit in terms of latency, the time that it takes to request a page and for the server to be able to respond, because the distance is so great in terms of communicating with satellites. If we happen to be on the road and we don't have our equipment with us, we haven't taken our laptop, and we still need to be able to access email and things of that nature, we can visit a cyber cafe, which is just a location that provides access to a computer with internet access. Usually we're going to pay a fee to be able to do that. A word of caution here: when you're logging into somebody else's machine, be wary of the things that you access on that machine. It can be a security risk. You don't know what they might be doing in terms of logging keystrokes and things like that. So be careful what you do in a cyber cafe setting. If we do happen to have some of our equipment with us, we can access the internet a lot of times at a hotspot, and most of us know what those are. If you go to McDonald's, you go to Starbucks, a lot of times you have free access to the internet in those places. Similar caveat should be noted there. It's less of a security concern in that it's your device that you're dealing with, but again, because you're logging in through somebody else's wireless service, you really don't know what's going on that network. So be careful of some of the things that you do in those environments. Once we've figured out how we want to some of our physical connectivity options to the internet, we have to start thinking about the ISPs. When the world consisted of dial-up internet access for the most part, this was a separate consideration. We had cable, we had our telephone service, but we used our telephone service just to dial into an ISP's bank of modems, and that's what provided us access to the internet. With the push towards broadband, a lot of those ISPs have kind of merged, been bought up by the cable companies and by the telephone companies. So in most cases anymore, those companies are our ISPs. And there's usually a charge to be able to access their service. As far as their services are in terms of speed, are evaluated based on their bandwidth, how fast that your connection is, and that bandwidth is usually measured in megabyte or gigabyte. There are other things that you want to consider as well, though, depending on the types of services that you want to be able to use. For example, if you want to host your own server, you want to make sure that certain ports are not blocked. Depending on whether or not you're wanting to offer web services, you want to make sure port 80 is open. If it's email, you start looking for other ports depending on email or FTP, or etc. So how does requesting a web page work once we have all this connectivity in place? We type in our web address into a browser, and that request is going to go to our cable modem, which is going to convert that into a series of signals that can be understood across our cable network, assuming we're on cable. It's going to travel across that cable network back to the headquarters, or really probably the data center for the cable company, who's then going to access the internet at large. And our request is going to travel across routers all across the internet until it gets to its destination facility, which is then going to retrieve the web page that we've requested and return that back in reverse fashion. Now, every device that connects to the internet has to be uniquely identified on the network. In other words, we can't have two computers that have the same IP address at the same time. It leads to a lot of confusion when a request is sent. Other computers don't know how to respond to the correct computer because there's a duplication. So one of the ways that we do that, or one of the ways that we make sure that we don't have duplicate IP addresses, is we assign a unique one to each computer. In a lot of cases we'll use DHCP to be able to manage our IP addresses that are assigned to different clients and make sure that there aren't duplicate IP addresses assigned. So an IP address is a unique sequence of numbers that uniquely identifies each computer. The computer interprets this as a binary number, 8 bits. But it's a little bit easier for us to look at it in terms of 4 octets. So we can look in our example there at the bottom, IP version 4 address of 72.14.207.99. That represents an IP address. As people, we struggle a little bit when we have to start thinking about IP addresses, especially as you start to add up the number of addresses that we need to keep track of. Take, for example, Google.com. That one's the name is fairly easy to remember, but when you start, and if you just have one IP address, that's fairly easy to remember. But once you start adding up a bunch of other addresses, the names are much easier as people for us to remember than it would be to remember all those different IP addresses. So we like to think of things in terms of domain names. What we need to be able to make this work, though, is some sort of a directory service that's going to tie a domain name to a specific IP address. And that's where a DNS server comes in. A DNS server is basically a directory that keeps track of various IP addresses and the associated domain name for that IP address, so that when our computer needs to access a particular computer, we type in the domain name, it goes out and asks the DNS server, what is the IP address for this domain? The DNS server responds with the appropriate IP address. Now our computer is able to directly access the server that it's trying to access. Now let's talk about websites in general, kind of some of the general domains that we might want to access. These are referred to as top level domains. The very common ones are .com, .edu, .gov, .mil, .net, and .org. There's a lot of other top-level domains that are out there. Some of them are country-specific, but there's other ones as well, depending on the type of function of those particular websites. But these are certainly the most common ones. If you happen to type in a web address or a URL and you don't get to the site that you thought you were going to get to, be sure and check the spelling of the domain name that you spelled out, as well as the top level domain portion of that address. For example, typing out whitehouse.com used to take you to a much different site than it does today, as opposed to whitehouse.gov. They used to be completely different sites. So here's kind of a representation of what we were discussing a moment ago. You type in google.com, your browser requests from the DNS server the domain, the IP address for that domain name. It responds with the IP address, and now your computer's actually able to go out and query that IP address for the information that you've requested. We talked about in a previous class the distinction between the Internet and the World Wide Web. The Internet is a collection of these different networks across the world, across the globe. It's really reflective of the hardware that's in place, as well as a lot of the protocols that exist to be able to make communications possible. The World Wide Web is a subset of that. It's a very specific subset, and it's probably the part that we tend to think of the most when we talk about the Internet. We think of the web because it's this very graphical-oriented aspect to the web, or to the Internet. And so that's what we think of. A website is a collection of related web pages and associated items. In other words, when we go to a website, we kind of expect all the various pages to be related to all the other pages that are hosted on that website. In a sense, we kind of use that as an evaluation mechanism to evaluate that particular website. If we go to a website and we find a few pages that don't really seem to make a lot of sense, they don't really seem to tie in with the rest of the web page, we automatically discount that particular website as somehow being a little bit less than acceptable in terms of being a valid source, a good source of information. If, however, we go and we look at that website and it looks very professional, it has there's no typos, there's no misspellings, it seems to have a clear purpose, all of a sudden our opinion of that site goes up, as does our interpretation of the content that's being hosted on that website. All those various pages that are hosted on that website are served up by a web server. Much like the DNS server keeps track of domain names and IP addresses, a web server keeps track of the various web pages that are hosted on the server. When the request comes in, the web server goes and finds the appropriate page and responds with the appropriate page depending on the request that comes in. Also related to the World Wide Web is this concept of Web 2.0. This used to be kind of a buzzword in the field. However, it's really become something kind of expected anymore. In the very early days of the web, we really had a lot of very static content. By static, we mean something that doesn't change a lot. It's much like a text file. It's a file that if you wanted to update, you'd have to manually go in, change that file, and save it. Web 2.0 really allows for a lot more interaction on the part of users with a website. So you can customize pages, you can add personal information, you can share things. You can do all kinds of things with Web 2.0. So there's a lot more interaction between the user and the website as opposed to the directionality just going from the website to the user. We access these websites through a browser. There's a lot of different browsers that are out there. Essentially, a browser is taking a web page and interpreting that information to be able to produce what you have on your screen. A static HTML file is really nothing more than a text file with very specific headers. Those headers tell the browser how to interpret that information and how to display it in terms of the colors and the fonts and things of that nature. There are a lot of, as I mentioned, there are a lot of different browsers that are out there. The very first commercially available one or widespread browser out there was Mosaic, but there have been others. There's been Netscape Navigator, for example. There's Firefox. There was Mozilla. Internet Explorer, obviously, Opera, the Tor browser. My personal favorite is Google Chrome. But there's a lot of different browsers that are out there, and while there's a lot of commonality between them, there are some differences between them as well. The text also talks about the definition of a home page. I wouldn't put a lot of stock in that. I don't think it's particularly valuable to know what a home page is per se, because it's kind of past its prime with the use of things like tab browsing and the ability to open up the browser back to where you left off, or to open very specific groups of pages and things of that nature. The idea behind a home page has shifted significantly. When we go to access a web page, we want to type in either its web address or its URL. And while these terms are often used interchangeably, they're not exactly the same thing. A web address tends to be just the web address itself. So we might type in www.nps.gov to access that website. The URL, on the other hand, is the entire thing that you see there. It includes the protocol at the beginning, http://. That's because that's a very specific protocol. We can actually access other services through a web browser. For example, a lot of sites we can access FTP servers using a web browser. So it makes a difference as to the protocol that we enter. A URL also includes any subdirectories or the rest of the path that we need to be able to access a very specific file. And then it includes that last part there on the right, places.htm. So it identifies the very specific file and the extension that you're trying to access. I wouldn't worry about the distinction too much. There is a distinction between the two, but for the most part, these terms are used interchangeably. Something else you should be familiar with is the concept of a web app. A web app is an application stored on a web server that you access through a browser. A good example of this is something like Google Docs. You're able to create documents and spreadsheets and things of that nature all through the use of a web app that you use with your browser. I personally really like this approach. I think that it allows you to reduce your footprint that you have on your own computer, in that you don't have to load special software or anything like that to be able to create documents, to be able to create spreadsheets, or to be able to create presentations using these Google services, these Google apps. At the same time, it allows you to store these online. This gives you a number of different benefits. One, if your hard drive were to crash, you're not going to lose your data. Google does a much better job of backing up their systems than we typically do as end users. It doesn't add software to your computer, so one of the benefits to that is you have a smaller attack surface. The more stuff you have loaded on your system, the more things are vulnerable. At the same time, the more things you load, the slower your system tends to get as well. So I really like the use of web apps when you can. Now the downside to it is if you don't have internet connectivity, you don't have access to your files or to your applications. So that's the caveat to the argument behind web apps. Something else you should be familiar with when we're talking about websites is the idea behind a search engine. And this next section starts to talk about some of the different types of websites, but it starts off talking about search engines, and that's because this is a particularly important type of website. It's what allows us to find the stuff that we're looking for, whether it be a web page, images, videos, whatever. I know a lot of people use search engines to find very specific web pages. In fact, they don't even bother to type in Microsoft, for example. They could type in Microsoft.com and go directly to the website. Rather, they open up Google and type in Microsoft there and then click on the first link, which is going to be Microsoft. So we use search engines an awful lot. Related to this type of search engine is the idea behind a directory classification system. It's a different approach. This is an approach more like what Yahoo has traditionally used, which is a kind of a decision tree approach to classifying information. It allows you to research a topic from a very broad perspective and drill down to a more specific area. The downside of this approach is if you happen to make the wrong classification, it's going to make it more difficult to find what you're looking for. When it comes to searches, using a search engine, not everybody is as good at it as they seem to think that they are. The book gives you a few little tidbits, a few tools that you can use to be able to become a little bit better in terms of being able to find what you're looking for. Personally, I like the advanced search feature in Google. This allows you to really be creative about some of the things that you're looking for. So if you want to limit your search to just PDF files, you can do that using the advanced Google search features. You can also limit your search to a particular domain. So say, for example, you go to a particular website and it does not have a search feature built into that website, you can use Google's advanced search features to limit your search to just that website. So there's a lot of different features that you can use in that advanced search feature for Google, and I would highly recommend that you do that. Being able to search things efficiently and effectively is an invaluable resource. So the book talks about this general classification of websites. So they identify 13 types of websites. Now I don't want you to get hung up on this number of 13, but what I do want you to take away from this discussion in the text is this idea that there are general ideas or general categories of websites. The reason being is if you get to a website and it pulls, it starts to blend across too many of these different categories at the same time, the purpose behind that website becomes very blurred. And again, like I discussed earlier, the value of that website or the focus of that website starts to diminish, and as a result, you start to question the validity of a lot of the information that it contains on it. It may be very valuable to the person that created it, but it starts to lose value to others who might be trying to consume that information. So these types of websites that they identify in the text: online social networks, informational websites, Wikipedia and stuff like that, media sharing and bookmarking sites. My wife likes some of those. I forget the name of the one that she really likes, but essentially it's a way to share bookmarks, and she creates this page that allows her to share her page of bookmarks with people at work, and so that way they kind of have a common set of bookmarks that they can work from. There's news and weather, sports sites, there's educational sites, business, governmental, and organizational sites that are out there. There are blogs, and some people like to log things that are going on in their daily life. We see political pundits that keep blogs and things of this nature, celebrities that keep blogs. We see wikis, wikibooks, Wikipedia, etc., WikiLeaks. Health and science sites, entertainment sites, financial sites, travel and mapping sites, shopping and auctions, so things like eBay and Amazon. Careers and employment, so think like Monster, for example, LinkedIn, e-commerce sites, and then portals, sites that we use that kind of pull things together that we're interested in, allows us to customize it, usually has a search function built into it, and this becomes a landing page for us to kind of reach out and go to other sites. So if we're going to develop our own site, our own group of web pages, we really probably ought to very clearly identify which one of those types of sites that it is that we want to create, because we want to have a purpose behind the site. In other words, we need to start planning it, and we need to start designing what that site's going to look like. Typically, when we develop a site, we want to jump straight to the create the website part. That's the fun part. That's the part where we get to see the results of our effort, the results of our work. Unfortunately, when we don't do enough planning and we don't do enough design, we start to end up with those sites that have a blurred purpose, and they tend to serve no one other than the developer. So that's something we really want to be careful of when we're developing a website. Then we've got to start making decisions about hosting that website. Hopefully we've already been thinking about that back during the planning and design phase. We can host those sites ourselves. I like to host my own site. I've got a couple of servers sitting here next to my computer here that I like to host my web server from. I like to do that because I have a lot more control over it. I need to be familiar with this stuff, teaching it anyway, so it just makes sense for me to do so. But there are other options out there. If you don't have the opportunity to maintain things, the hardware and the software, etc., you can pay for hosting. GoDaddy, for example, hosts websites. You can have them host your website. Network Solutions. There's a lot of hosting companies that are out there that, for a very small amount of money to a large amount of money, can host the websites and host your domain name and all kinds of different types of services that they offer. And perhaps one of the more difficult things is this idea behind maintaining the website. Once you throw that website up there, it becomes dated very quickly. And if you don't maintain it, you're going to start to lose viewers. They're not going to keep coming back to your site unless you're updating it with fresh content. Some of that content hopefully includes different types of multimedia. We want to include multimedia because it's much more engaging than just text. Think about a Word document. If you look at that Word document and there's nothing but black and white text on that page, it becomes very boring very quickly. We like the use of tables, and we like the use of images to be able to graphically demonstrate and illustrate some of the things that we're talking about on a page. The same thing is true on a website. The difference is on a website, we can be much more creative with some of our multimedia options. So in addition to graphics, we can also include things like animation or audio and video and virtual reality. A graphic is just a digital representation of non-text information. So when we look at something like what we have here for the San Diego Zoo, we see images all over this page. And it's a pretty busy page. There's a lot of colors, bright colors, and all that type of stuff. That's probably appropriate for a zoo. But you look at all those images, and they can be all kinds of file types. The image here talks about BMP files or bitmap files, GIF files, JPEG files, PNG files, and TIFF files, but there's a lot of other image files that exist. Typically on a website, you're normally going to see bitmap files, GIF files, and PNG files. JPEG files are fine. There's nothing wrong with them. They're better for pictures of people. They tend to be higher resolution, and as a result, they tend to be larger files. And a lot of times, larger files are things that we want to try to avoid online to make sure we don't slow down the loading of our web pages too much. We can also use something that's called an infographic, which is a visual representation of data and information. And the idea is we can cram in a lot of complex information very quickly and make it very easy to interpret. And it's a way to get a lot of very, very pertinent facts about a phenomenon in a very nice, concise way. We can also include animation. Unfortunately, when I imported the slides into my presentation here, this animation doesn't work the way it does in the PowerPoint. But animation is just the appearance of motion created by displaying a series of still images. So the example that I gave in class was when we talked about, I mentioned the use of iFunny. iFunny has GIFs available, and GIFs can be saved as a series of images, giving you that feeling of movement. You can also include audio on websites. This is something I'd be very careful of using depending on how you want to use it on your website. If you want to include audio files that people can download for podcasting and those types of purposes, or lectures and things like that, that's a great use of audio on the web. If you like to use audio on your web page when it loads in the background, that's really cute for about 5 seconds. So that's something I would tend to avoid personally, but certainly you can include audio on your site. Video is something that's becoming much more feasible due to the proliferation of broadband. It's much more feasible today to be able to use video because we have the speed, the bandwidth to be able to do so. The popularity of YouTube and other video sharing sites really makes this very easy. And they say a picture's worth 1,000 words. Well, a video is worth 1,000 pictures. It's great for demonstrating how to do things. It's great for sharing lectures. It's great for entertainment. So there's all kinds of things that you can do with video and sharing those on your websites. We can also share virtual reality environments. The one that most people are probably familiar with is Second Life. And this is basically an environment that you can kind of get immersed into and interact with others in a real-time environment. I can really see a great use of this in the future, and actually it's already in use in some places for educational purposes. You have virtual space where people meet up, you can have lectures, you can have students sit in a virtual hall or a virtual classroom, you can raise hands, ask questions, get questions answered, and so on. So I really kind of expect this to be something that continues to become more and more part of our daily lives. We talked about a web app earlier. Kind of related to this is this idea of a plugin. A plugin is a program that extends the capability of a web browser. The example I gave in class when I pulled out of the presentation, which I don't want to do here, is Hootsuite. I like to use Hootsuite to be able to share web pages that I run across that I think people in my social networks might be interested in. If that particular page does not have some sort of a share button on it, it doesn't matter. I can use my plugin, my Hootsuite plugin, to be able to share that anyway. So it's something that extends the functionality or the capability of a browser. Having said that, the downside to this is on the flip side of some of the stuff I discussed earlier. Because it's something we're adding to our computer, it starts to slow down our browser a little bit. Because it's something we're adding to our system, we're expanding our security footprint a bit. So we're a bit more vulnerable when we do things like this. But a lot of times that functionality, we have to weigh that functionality against the benefit against the risks, and make a determination on whether or not we want to do that. Other internet services, obviously, like I said, the web browsing is by far, the World Wide Web is by far the predominant web service that we think about when we think about the World Wide Web and we think about the internet. But there's lots of other services that occur or that are used on the internet. Email is one of those services. Email is the transmission of messages and files via computer network. We oftentimes today access our email through a web browser, and this is referred to as webmail. And so there's a lot of this stuff that goes on the back end that has to do with the internet, that we don't see any differently than when we're accessing the World Wide Web. If, however, we want to focus on the email parts of it, we can access our email using an email program rather than a browser. And this email program, referred to as a client, sometimes gives you additional capability that you don't have through the web browser itself. For example, if you need to archive messages, an email program facilitates this, makes it much easier to be able to do. Also tends to integrate with other things. You can download multiple accounts or have multiple accounts. Integrates with a contact list, your calendar functions, tasks, all those types of things. So if you look at this image, it probably looks very similar to what we talked about earlier in terms of accessing a web page. There's a few other steps, and that's because email is handled a little bit differently. The biggest difference is the protocols that are used. Whereas when we talk about some of the different layers for our web pages that uses HTTP and TCP, etc. Mail uses SMTP and either POP or IMAP. And so these are some of the different protocols that get used when we talk about email. And it makes a difference in terms of how our incoming email server works, and the functionality of our email. Now, if we're typing out emails one by one, it's not a big deal to copy and paste an address into our address bar or type out that email address. It's pretty easy and straightforward to do. If, however, we're talking about trying to email a list of users, a group of users, 100, 200, 500, 1,000 users, and we do this somewhat regularly, it can get pretty tedious trying to put all those addresses in every time. Rather than doing that, we can create what's referred to as an email list, which makes us create that list one time. We save that list, and now we can easily send out messages and updates and news and all those types of things to that email list, which keeps track of all those individual email addresses. Still other services, these next two are somewhat related: instant messaging and chat. These are synchronous communications, and when I say synchronous, think of S. It starts with an S. Think of same whenever you hear synchronous. I say same because it's real time. The communication's happening at the same time, so you're sending messages back and forth to each other at the same time that the other person is online. As it relates to a chat room or a chat specifically, you're going to get together in some sort of a chat room to discuss a topic and things like that. Now, those are distinct from a discussion forum. A discussion forum is asynchronous communication. In other words, you're able to type out a message and save that message or post that message to a discussion forum, and then you can leave, and you may not get a response for days or weeks or maybe never. The advantage to this is it becomes an archive on a particular topic, and so there's a wealth of information in discussion forums. The best example that I could give would be the servers that I bought to host some of my services. I purchased them on eBay, and when they came in, they had this very loud sound to them. The cooling fans are just really sound. There's no way that I could have those in my home and live with the level of sound that they were generating. I went online, did a few Google searches, and ran across a discussion forum in which they talked about a modification for those fans to be able to quiet them down. And now I've got them sitting right here next to my machine as I'm recording this, and it's at a much more acceptable level. But the idea was that knowledge was captured sometime in the past in that discussion forum, and when I had the issue arise, I was able to go out and find that and implement that solution. We also have video over IP and voice over IP that we can use across the internet. These are great ways to stay in touch, keep in touch with people. I have virtual office hours that I use through Google Hangouts. So this is a good way to kind of put a face with somebody, a face with their voice, or hear their voice across the internet. Usually for free, oftentimes for a very cheap price. And that's another use of the internet that does not involve the World Wide Web. Still another service is FTP, File Transfer Protocol. This is a standard for transferring files either up or down to or from a server. Most operating systems include some sort of an FTP client on your machine. That's one side of the relationship. The other side is an FTP server, and the server is where you're going to connect to with your client. The server is going to control access to files. It's going to control, and that controlling access is either going to be through anonymous access or by controlling which users can and cannot upload and download files, things of that nature. And it's also going to keep track of which files actually are allowed to be uploaded or downloaded. The last thing that this text talks about, or this that's discussed in this chapter, is the concept of netiquette. Netiquette's the code of acceptable internet behavior. And this is something that students oftentimes struggle with. They get so enamored with sending texts back and forth with their friends that this starts to bleed over a lot in the way they conduct themselves with their parents, with their professors, with their bosses eventually. And so this is something that I think students need to particularly be aware of. Kind of a little sidebar: when I first graduated with my doctorate, my title was not that big of a deal to me. So oftentimes in class I went by my first name. It was not a big deal. And that stopped when I started getting emails that said "dude." That's not an appropriate way to address your professor. It's not an appropriate way to address your boss. So be aware of who you're having a conversation with, and make sure that you're dealing with them in a way that's appropriate. So be polite, avoid offensive language, avoid sending and posting flames, this back and forth and of nothing more than insulting and demeaning messages back and forth. It doesn't accomplish anything. It detracts from the discussion forum. It detracts from the purpose behind a chat room. So don't get involved in flame wars. Be careful when using sarcasm and humor. It's hard to convey facial expressions and things of that nature in text. So be aware of that. I personally can't see it. My wife can read a sentence and automatically inflect some of the meaning, some of the between lines type things that are going on. But be aware of that. Just try to avoid sarcasm and humor whenever you can. Do not use all capital letters. It's the same thing as shouting. One of the things that you can do to start to address some of that misinterpretation that's possible is use emoticons. That's a way to express to some degree emotion within your texts, within your email messages, and so on. I would also be careful about the use of abbreviations depending on who you're discussing, who you're talking to. If you're talking to a friend or somebody that you have a casual relationship, they're certainly appropriate. They're not appropriate when dealing with a boss or your professor. Be forgiving. They talk about clearly identifying spoilers. It depends on the environment that you're working in. Be forgiving of others' mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. Don't start firing off messages. That's how flame wars get started. So be forgiving of others' mistakes, and also read frequently asked questions whenever you can. A lot of times when you ask a question, it's already been answered, and when you start getting that same question over and over and over again, it can really start to become annoying. So read frequently asked questions. A lot of cases, you'll learn answers to questions that you didn't even know you had. So it's a very good resource that's out there. So in summary for this chapter, we talked about the evolution of the internet, where it kind of started and how it's evolved over time. We talked in more detail today about the web and how it's a little bit different than the internet. We talked about some of the different types of websites and some of the different categories of websites. We talked about the other services that are available on the internet other than just the web. And then the chapter finishes up talking about netiquette. So this is a pretty good chapter. I hope that you've enjoyed reading it. I hope you enjoy the video. I hope it kind of helps answers any questions that you might have. If you have anything else, let me know. Send me a message, shoot me an email, and I'll see what I can do to get your question answered. Until next time, take care.